Hello and welcome to Upstream at AKS, the series where we dive into how we're building cloud native experiences in the open source community. Thanks for being here. My name is Lachie Evenson and I'm a product manager on Azure's cloud native ecosystem team, where our mission is to help make the community successful on their cloud native journeys. We have an awesome team that you'll find in almost every part of this ecosystem. And today I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Sertaç, who's a member of our Upstream team. Welcome, Sertaç. It's great to have you here. Please tell us a little about what you do at Microsoft and in the cloud native ecosystem.
Thank you, Lachie. Thanks for having me here. I'm an engineering manager at Microsoft. I focus on the upstream cloud native security space. I work with CNCF projects like Gatekeeper or COPA, and my team also provides secure artifacts for usage at Microsoft. These include services like AKS. So if you're using one of the Azure services that depend on a cloud native component, chances are it has been produced by my team.
That's excellent. Now, security is definitely a hot topic that's getting a lot of eyeballs in the ecosystem. And you mentioned something supply chain as well. So supply chain security, how do they come together? And I know that, this is a really hot topic in the ecosystem. What can you tell us about what you're doing in the supply chain security space?
Yeah, we do much different approaches for things. So for example, for Kubernetes, we integrate some of our services and some of our build infrastructure and the services that deploy to Kubernetes integrated with Gatekeeper to make sure that the supply chain artifacts are checked at the door, making sure that the images are secure, and then they're checked for things like provenance and SBOMs, and making sure that these artifacts are secure.
Yeah, so you're talking about getting checked at the door, artifacts are secure. Like, what problem are you actually trying to prevent here? I don't know a lot about supply chain security, so what is actually the risk of not having this stuff?
So the most of the risk is the lack of provenance. So provenance is basically a documentary history of an artifact. So say when a team or when a person produces an image, say my app v2, then this container may lack a cryptographic proof of the provenance. So it's usually relies on things like trust or conventions to be able to make sure that it says like, hey, I produced this container image, but there is no cryptographic proof that a specific build agent or a specific Git commit produced that container image.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is like validating the integrity. So it came from where it supposedly came from, right? And you have a way, when you mention cryptographic evidence, what's a great analogy, or do you have one that I can think of that we use in other places?
I think the easiest one probably that most will relate to is like the Git commits. So for example, a specific source commit, is it the same thing that the image produced? So these are like things like the build provenances will be able to provide this information, as well as things like the SBOMs to be able to, you can see like the cryptographic proof of, hey, if a dependency is saying what it is. And then you can identify a specific commit.
Got it. Okay, so you're going from your source code repository, like on GitHub, for example, and through each stage of your software being built, at each step it's going down that. I like to think about a production line. So I always love that analogy of cars being built, and you've seen them go down the production line. They add bits and components. So each step would actually be responsible for saying, this is what happened during this part of the process. This is what thing did it, and then stamping that in some way, and you'd call that whole thing the provenance. Is that what you're referring to?
That's correct. So these are basically answers questions about like, was this artifact built by a trusted build system?
Okay.
Was it built from like an approved release branch, or has it been like tampered with since it was built? So in the SALSA framework, which stands for supply chain levels for software artifacts, and answers some of these questions and more.
Okay, so you said something about salsa. Now I'm getting hungry, but tell us a little bit more. So you've got your CI/CD pipeline. You've got your software going down. It starts at your developers and your Git repository, goes all the way to your production or your deployment environments, right? We're adding provenance now. You talked about at the start kind of preventing things that you didn't want or gatekeeping. You mentioned this project Gatekeeper.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit about how Salsa fits into this whole puzzle as well that you just mentioned.
Yeah, so Salsa provides the framework for to answering some of the questions, as well as providing some of these like attestations and like provenance data, as well as like how provides a framework of how these things are checked.
Okay. Okay. So, like anything in technology, we use a lot of fancy words to kind of describe very, everyday processes that people otherwise would probably understand if we didn't use the words. Provenance. How would you summarize provenance? It's just an artifact, or it's just a document that says these are the steps that happened and they happened by these people, and you can independently verify that.
Exactly. So these information like the source of the repository, like
Okay.
a Git commit ID, and then the secure builder that built that artifact.
Okay. Excellent. So I think, what is the risk? So if you were to, you add all these pieces and then you check for them before you allow your software to be run in this environment, like what is actually the risk profile? How is that an attack surface that
Mhm.
is vulnerable?
Yeah, probably the biggest nightmare scenario that we see like day to day is say your application uses like an open source library, and then say somehow an attacker was able to get this application's credentials for their repo or registry and whatnot, and was able to like infiltrate this the application source or or the artifacts, and
Yeah.
then your application didn't know any of this stuff, and then was able to like pull this dependency and then built it. And now that your CI/CD pipeline built and published this to your container registry, and your service picked this up, and now you're running this malicious piece of software, which may be attacking your services
Okay.
or stealing information. And then this is like some of the attacks we've seen, like so the SolarWinds or Log4j, and then something got damaged and compromised somewhere upstream.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much. So you got your software, you got provenance. You mentioned this other word, attestations. Can you tell me what attestations are?
Yeah, attestations are things like, for example, like a software bill of materials, and that things that you can say like, hey, my software got compromises of these sort of ingredients, and you can verify that, hey, my app contains these sort of list of ingredients.
Okay. All right. So provenance attestation. So when you said ingredients, you kind of made me think of, when I go to the store and if I want to buy organic, for example, there'll be a USDA sticker on it that says it's organic. So an attestation is basically something akin to that. It's some way that you're stamping that this thing went through some process that's well defined and people trust. So that when they're actually picking that food up and they actually are guaranteed that it's indeed organic to whatever that standard certifies. Is that a good analogy for an attestation?
That's correct. And then you can also see just like the list of ingredients. Then you buy a food,
Okay,
you can see the list of ingredients that, hey, this
that
contains
you have in
peanut.
your software.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm starting to piece this together. Your software is going down the line. You're stamping it with either attestations or provenance at each step, and then you've got all this evidence at the end. And now you're going to deploy it to your development environment, your production environment.
Mhm.
Presumably, Kubernetes is there. You mentioned this project that you work on called Gatekeeper. Can you tell me how it fits into this equation?
Yeah, I would love to talk about it. Gatekeeper is a CNCF graduated open policy agent subproject. It has been originally co-created by Microsoft, and we've been maintainers for Gatekeeper for a long time. You can think of it as like a powerful admission controller for Kubernetes. The best analogy is you can think of it as like an intelligent bouncer at the door of your place, and then which checks the for certain things like policies, or checks, for example, credentials, that sort of stuff. But it is a generic policy engine that can be extended to check for any policy.
Okay. And, like me showing up at the nightclub to the bouncer showing my ID, how does Gatekeeper actually validate that something is where it came from and is truthful? How can you stop Gatekeeper or the intelligent bouncer from being tricked
Yeah,
with my fake ID?
yeah, absolutely. So and then so normally Gatekeeper basically looks at the Kubernetes cluster itself, right? So it only can tell about the admission request, and then if there are other resources in the cluster, it can look into those things. But we added a feature called external data into Gatekeeper, and this allows Gatekeeper to look outside the cluster, which could be anything outside the cluster, to be able to get information. This could be like an API or like another call to something else that it can get information from. And then this allows Gatekeeper to enrich the data to be able to make a better decision on what to approve or deny.
Okay. So it's kind of like, your bouncer can pick up the phone and call some 1-800 number to verify that this thing is actually indeed legitimate.
That's
Okay,
right.
so I mean, where are you seeing this be used, right? What's a great example of, the value that this provides? So you've got all this stuff. Is there any place that you've seen it out there in the wild that really is tying this all together?
Yeah, absolutely. So the friend that the bouncer calls in Gatekeeper, we call it external data provider. And
Okay.
there are like a bunch of external data providers that from out there in the community that integrates with Gatekeeper to give this functionality to Gatekeeper. We have Ratify, which is another CNCF project. I believe it's under Notary now. And then recently, GitHub announced their provider that checks for build provenance attestations, which kind of ties in back to the build provenance and the attestations on how can we check these like the legitimacy of these sort of artifacts.
Okay. All right. So, and obviously having GitHub as an external data provider in this case gives you access to a wealth of information about these repositories. So, what could somebody do with that specifically? And could you give me an example of an action you might take using that?
Yeah, absolutely. So while when you're in GitHub, you can use certain actions like the attest action to make sure that your artifacts are published with the GitHub's signatures, and then they're basically verified, and then they are pushed to say GitHub container registry, and then make sure they're signed and there's a cryptographic proof out in the GitHub artifacts. And the way that this works with Gatekeeper is that Gatekeeper calls the external data provider.
Okay.
In this case, the GitHub artifact provider.
Okay.
And then GitHub artifact provider calls the GitHub API, but in this case, it's I believe the OCI refers artifacts that is hosted in the GitHub container registry. And then the provider can look at the legitimacy of this and then check the validity of these artifacts, say if the build attestation is signed correctly, or if it's coming from an approved branch, or if it's coming from like an approved builder, and then or like a approved committage, and if these are all legitimate, it tells Gatekeeper that, hey, okay, now this is fine to allow, and then Gatekeeper makes this allow or deny decision based on this information. And not only that, but Gatekeeper also continuously audits the resources in the cluster. So even if you have this policy deployed after some time, it looks and audits the existing resources in the cluster. So if you have something that is against these policies, it'll tell the cluster admins with actionable information that they can use it to say, hey, this is not against the policy.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so I see. It's all coming together here, where you're actually taking these actions. So I think one of the powerful things for audits would be, as you're rolling out these policies, to actually get some insights about, if there's things already running on your cluster, you want to bring them back into compliance. Is that, something Gatekeeper can help you with as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You can start a policy as like a dry run, so you don't have to enforce it right away. So you get like start with hey, dry run. We want to start with an audit first. Get the hey, what will be compatible, what will be compliant, what will be not compliant, and then say maybe you're missing some signatures or some of the team's artifacts. Then you can talk to the teams and making sure that they sign and then provide build provenance to these artifacts, and then they will be compliant.
Excellent. All right. So, when we started this conversation, you were talking about things that you worked on, and now we've taken this arc into, GitHub, and, how are these things connected, and how is this important? Because, you're talking about a project that you work on at Microsoft. Now you're talking about GitHub integrations to make this thing work. Like, tell me about the big picture here and what you're really driving towards.
Yeah, I think that can be summarized as like we want to provide like end-to-end security for the users, and we also want to make this secure by default and like almost invisible, right? When they don't have to be like a gatekeeper or like a policy expert, but we want to provide this integration through open source or through like the Azure's offerings to make it easy to onboard, and they don't even have to think about it because some of these things are they're already been done and then they're secure by default. Yeah, I think that like providing that narrative that's like the end-to-end security, I think that's the most important thing.
And why is that important to your team to build?
Because we want to make sure that our customers and our internal teams are secure. That's one of our top priorities.
So you mentioned this concept of secure by default. Take me through what you think that means.
It can mean many things, but for some of the things like so these policies, they roll out by default, right? You don't have to think about, hey, does these need to be changed? But then if you want to overwrite it, say, for example, you have an emergency, right? Say you need to have some deployment, you can provide an escape hatch to provide this emergency to go through, but you still keep it auditable. So tomorrow there's a trail that, hey, somebody did this. So there's like accountability and auditability in that sense. But by default, the policies are there, and then they make sure that we secure by default.
Okay, so yeah, I get the concept, and I think that's really crucial to security being adopted. You've talked about a lot about, the different pieces here, provenance, attestations, SBOMs, going through this gatekeeper policy. How do people get started with this, and what's an avenue they can use to start understanding this? Because I think if I was responsible for a software supply chain, it seems like a lot, and I may not know where to start. Now, when you're mentioning things like, secure by default, I get a little bit excited because it's like maybe I don't have to do anything, but I get to reap the benefits of this. Like, walk me through a journey to make that easy and simple, and how I might start using this.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the Gatekeeper, we have this open source solution. Obviously, you can anybody can pick up and use, and then you can the GitHub the provider is also open source, and you can pick up and use. As part of Gatekeeper, we also provide these library of policies called Gatekeeper Library. And then your organization might want to pick up some of these libraries, and then they can drop it in their cluster, and then they get like a baseline set of policies that are like, hey, these are good to start with, and then you kind of increase your profile after that. And then as far as part of our work with Azure teams, Gatekeeper is part of the Azure policy. And then when you have a, say, Azure Kubernetes cluster, and you deploy the Azure policy add-on, and then you can set up these like a baseline or restricted and any other policies from the policy library, a part of the Azure policy, and you can get started right away without being like a gatekeeper expert or without being a policy expert, because these are policies that are like already vetted to make sure that we manage these policies and make sure they work as expected. And then these kind of provides the secure by default that I mentioned. And then if you want to increase your policies, you can definitely do that. Say and then you can add things like, for example, like the GitHub GitHub provider. For example, we also have the image integrity add-on in AKS. You can also add that as part of the Azure policy in AKS is offering to make sure that your images signatures are checked and valid. Yeah, I think that's part of the sort of in the theme of like making things like invisible, sort of like you get protected by default, and then making sure that the workloads are secure.
Excellent, excellent. I really appreciate how you've gone into such depth of explaining each of the pieces here, the solutions that you have in open source, but you're also saying that you have like product integrations as well that make it, batteries included solutions so that you don't have to be an expert running all these things. Now, Sertaç, thank you for walking us through all these steps and talking about, security for software supply chain. I really would like to understand what you're most excited about on what you're working on and what's coming down the pike for you before we wrap up.
Yeah, many things. So we are working on a project called COPA, which is a container patching solution. This basically kind of gives that sort of like the invisible thing that I mentioned. So you basically kind of put it in your like a CI pipelines, and then you can get a patched image right away with patching things like the OS vulnerabilities. You don't have to like continuously update it, but the system does it for you. We're applying for CNCF incubation. That's very exciting, and also improving Gatekeeper with more functionality that can support these external data scenarios,
Okay.
like making sure that we provide metrics to the providers, and they can monitor their like providers' health, and then take actions from that.
Excellent. I'm very excited to learn more about COPA myself. Sounds like a great project and the future of these external data providers. Just one last thing for folks who are listening in and they want to get connected in, they want to learn more and maybe even contribute. Where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have the Gatekeeper community calls on Wednesdays. So if anybody would love to join, we would love to have you. And you can also obviously find us on GitHub under Open Policy Agent/Gatekeeper. Feel free to open any issues if you have any questions. Other than that, CNCF tag security, and then tag stands for Technical Advisory Group. Security is a good place to start with all the security and secure supply chain related questions and discussions.
Oh, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sertaç, and educating me and everybody on software supply chain security, the risk, the threat, and what you can do about it in your cloud native ecosystem and environments. I really appreciate all your time here today. Please like and subscribe, and don't forget to let us know what you enjoyed about this show and what topics you'd love us to cover in the future. Thank you very much, Sertaç. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.